Tonight I'm reviewing the NFL Hall of Fame class of 2025. I enjoy history, and we'll look back at these players' careers and whether I think they belong in the Hall of Fame or not. At this point they're in. They're going to be entering the Hall this weekend. The headliner of the group is Antonio Gates. What I like to do is the name test when it comes to the Hall of Fame. When I say the name, Hall of Famer, yes or no. That's how I feel about it. We can debate about it, sure. We can argue. But do they pass the name test? And to me, the Hall of Fame has gotten a little loose with letting players in. They've been a little too liberal with letting good players, not necessarily great players, in the Hall of Fame. Antonio Gates, yes. Jared Allen, yes. Eric Allen, we have two Allens with only 4 players getting in. Maybe, probably, but I have to give a yes or no answer. I would lean toward no. Sterling Sharpe? No. Let's start with Antonio Gates. Very interesting career, long career. I find it difficult with tight ends because I don't evaluate tight ends like most do. What's valued today, of course, above all else, is receiving. And it's a much larger role for today's receiving age and receiving tight ends than what you would have 20, 25 years ago. And historically, you knew that the primary responsibility of a tight end was to block. I watch George Kittle every week as a 49er fan. And many times he is not used as a receiver. He truly is an extension of the offensive line. He doesn't always put up the gaudiest numbers because of that. He's used so much as a blocker, even on passing plays. Antonio Gates, first and foremost, is a receiving tight end. That's what he was during his career. And he was one of the best to do it. He has the most receiving touchdowns by a tight end in NFL history. Over 10,000 yards receiving as a tight end. He played with Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers. He was one of the great Chargers, that is San Diego Chargers, in history. Interestingly enough, he did not play any college football. No college football. And he had this much success, and he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. You can't ignore the fact that he was caught for using performance-enhancing drugs, PEDs. You can't ignore that, though I believe he's still a Hall of Fame player, and there's so much skill involved. He was a great athlete, size, speed, jumping ability. If we're just talking about his skill as a receiver, just simply and strictly as a receiving tight end, he's arguably top 5. But when I look at tight ends, I'm looking more for more than just your ability as a receiver. Are you a blocker? And he was a below average blocking tight end. That's what would keep him out of my top 5. And he would probably be more in the bottom back end of the top 10, or maybe just out of the top 10. I haven't done my own rankings on tight ends in a while. Blocking is very important to me. That's why Gronkowski is considered one of the very greats because he could do both. Gates was more of your pure receiver, and he was one of the best to do it. I do think he is the best player in this class. Jared Allen. I always felt Jared Allen was a Hall of Fame player. 5 Pro Bowls. When you have over 130 career sacks, it's hard to argue with. When you have over 30 forced fumbles, that's also hard to argue with. He had the 22 sack season, and amazingly, he did not win Defensive Player of the Year. That year, I believe Terrell Suggs did. I would not put him in my top 10 edge rushers in league history. Well, he's close. He's close. He was very effective without having... He didn't have a very long career. But he was consistently great. For his years with the Chiefs, and his most dominating years, you'd say, were with the Vikings. Next, Eric Allen. The thing about Eric Allen was, you have to ask the question, what took so long for him to get in? He's been waiting a long time, and I do want to say, in his defense, that they don't always get it right with voting with the Hall of Fame. Just go back a season ago, Randy Gradishar. He had to wait so many years to get in, but he was a player who was well deserving. He was a Defensive Player of the Year. He was the best player on the Orange Crush defense that did at least get to a Super Bowl. He was a great, great player and was long overdue. I'm not saying Eric Allen he's not on his level, but he was a very good player. I didn't really get to see him in his prime years, so in fairness, I can only really look at the highlights and hear what others have to say about him. I saw him later in his career, more when he was with the Raiders. But you are a very good player. If you have over 50 interceptions, you're around the football, you're a difference maker. He has very similar numbers to a player like Darrell Green, who's been in the Hall of Fame for years, and whose career was at the same time. Played with the Eagles, played with the Raiders. So I don't really have a problem with that. He gets in. The one I have more of a problem with is Sterling Sharpe. Sterling Sharpe was a receiver who had it all. He was a complete receiver. His entire career was with the Packers. But here's my problem with Sterling Sharpe. No one's arguing that he was a great receiver. But he only played for 7 years. And this is one of these things we always talk about when we evaluate players is short, brief dominance versus sustained, long greatness. What's more important? And I can appreciate a brief career that was dominating. But for the receiver position, 7 years is not enough. As good as those 7 years were, I mean, it's very unfortunate he had a career-ending injury. You can certainly argue, even though his career was cut short, he's the greatest receiver in Packers history. I mean, you could also argue James Lofton in his favor. Only 7 seasons. And 2, why did it take so long for him to get in? I mean, I was hearing Chris Sims arguing for Sterling Sharpe, saying, oh, well, yeah, of course he belongs. And, well, imagine if he didn't get hurt. He would be in the conversation as one of the greatest receivers of all time. Well, the point was we didn't get to see it. You can't just go off what you think would have happened if a player stayed healthy. And it was like Terrell Davis a number of years ago. Loved Terrell Davis. He was so great when he was healthy, but his career was so short. He shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I feel the same about Sterling Sharpe. Great, excellent player. One of the very best during his career, but it was too short. And then you're just opening it up for all these other players to get in the Hall of Fame who are only very good, but were not necessarily the greats. So those are my thoughts on this year's class.